In 1921, in a Philadelphia gymnasium that did not own a squat rack because almost no gym in America did, a 5'8" German weighing about 205 pounds tipped a barbell loaded to 553 pounds up onto one end, rolled it down across his shoulders as he dropped into the bottom of a squat and stood up with it. Then he did it again and again in front of a room full of men who had no idea what to call what they were watching. His name was Henry Steinborn, though he had been born Heinrich, and within a couple of years, everyone in American strength circles would know him as Milo. That squat became one of the strangest records in the history of the iron game. Not because 553 pounds is an unthinkable number today, because it isn't. Any decent powerlifting meet in the country has a handful of men who will do it before lunch. The reason it matters is that in 1921, standing up with 553 pounds was the easy part. Here's the thing modern lifters almost never think about, because the solution to it has been sitting in every gym they have ever walked into. Before the squat rack existed, if you wanted a barbell on your back, you had to put it there yourself. That meant cleaning it to your chest and then pressing or jerking it overhead and rolling it down behind your neck, which capped your squat at whatever you could clean and jerk. So a man with a 250-pound clean had a 250-pound squat forever, regardless of what his legs were actually capable of. That single mechanical problem is most of the reason American physical culture ignored the squat for decades. In the magazines of the day, a strongman was measured by the overhead press, the clean and jerk, and the one-arm snatch. The deep knee bend was something you did with a light weight for conditioning, if you bothered with it at all. It wasn't disrespected so much as it was invisible, because there was no practical way to load it heavy enough for anyone to discover what it did. In Germany, heavy squatting had already taken hold by the teens and early 20s, and Steinborn learned it in about the last place on earth you would expect. He was born on the 14th of March, 1893, in Siegburg, a small city not far from Dusseldorf. The details of his childhood are thin, which is normal for men of that era who became famous later. What is documented is that he left home at 15 to become a merchant sailor, which is how a German teenager ended up on the wrong side of the planet at precisely the wrong moment in history. In August of 1914, Britain declared war on Germany, and Australia moved fast to round up German nationals living in or passing through the country. Steinborn was 21 years old and stranded. He was classified as an enemy alien and put into an internment camp, where he stayed for something between 4.5 and 5 years, depending on which account you read. Now, most men in that situation lose those years. Steinborn spent them building a body. The camps housed thousands of Germans with nothing to do and no way out. And the men organized themselves the way men do. Steinborn learned to wrestle there. He also started lifting, using equipment that sounds like a joke until you think about it for a second. Barbells made from concrete blocks, tree trunks, whatever had mass and could be picked up. And when the improvised iron ran short, he lifted the other prisoners. That detail stops me every time. Picture it honestly. A 22-year-old kid, interned indefinitely by a government at war with his own, in a camp in New South Wales, working his way through the population of the camp itself as progressive resistance. He became the strongest man in there, which in a camp of that size is not a small claim. And the whole time he was training a movement that his adopted country would not take seriously for another 15 years. There is a real irony in the fact that the man who introduced America to heavy squatting only had the time to develop it because he was a prisoner of war. He was released in 1919 and made his way back to Germany, where he immediately started setting records in the local weightlifting scene. He took second at the 1920 German National Championships behind Karl Morke, who was one of the best in the country at the time. What he could not do was turn any of it into a living. Post-war Germany was not a place where a strongman got rich, and Steinborn was performing feats of strength for whatever coins people would part with. So he went to ask advice from the most famous strongman he could find, which was Arthur Saxon. Saxon, of the Saxon Trio, the man who bent pressed 370 pounds and whose name still gets brought up whenever anyone argues about the strongest overhead lifters in history. According to the account preserved by the Stark Center, Saxon told him to stop wasting his time in Germany, get to the United States, and specifically to find Herman's Gymnasium in Philadelphia. The way the story goes from there, Steinborn stowed away on a ship bound for the Americas and rode the rails east to Philadelphia. I will flag that the stowaway detail has the texture of strongman lore, which is a genre that never met a story it couldn't improve, but it shows up consistently across the serious sources, including the historians at the Stark Center who now hold his collection, so it is at minimum what Steinborn told people for 60 years. What happened when he got to Herman's is better documented, and it was a bloodbath. At a body weight of around 205 pounds, he snatched 205 pounds with each hand, one arm at a time, and clean and jerked 350. Those were not local numbers. Those were numbers that essentially nobody in America could touch in 1921. He arrived unknown, with no reputation, no federation ranking, and no way to prove anything except by doing it in front of witnesses, and he emptied the room's expectations in a single afternoon. One of the men watching was Alan Calvert, who owned the Milo Barbell Company, and was arguably the most important figure in American strength publishing at that point. Calvert gave him a job as a sort of representative for the company. He also gave him a nickname that stuck for the next 68 years, Milo, after Milo of Croton, the ancient Greek wrestler who supposedly built his strength by carrying a calf every day until it was a bull, which, for a man who had trained by picking up his fellow prisoners, is a better fit than Calvert probably realized. Then came the squat. The version most often reported is 553 pounds at Herman's Gymnasium in the early 1920s, done the only way Steinborn ever did it, with no rack and no assistance. Some wrestling history sources put the figure at 557 pounds for 3 repetitions and date it to 1919, right after his release. I lean toward 553 in Philadelphia, because that is what the strength historians and the surviving documentation support. But you should know the range exists rather than have someone hand you one number with false confidence. The mechanics are worth slowing down for, because this is the whole story. He would stand the loaded barbell on one end, which by itself is a real feat with a 1/4 ton of iron. Then he would step in close, get one end tucked against his body, and tip the bar over onto his shoulders while simultaneously descending into a full squat so that the weight arrived on his back at roughly the same instant he arrived at the bottom position. There is no bracing moment, no pause to gather yourself. You catch a falling 553 pounds in the deepest and weakest position of the movement, and then you stand up out of it. And then, having stood up, you still have to put it down. Steinborn would reverse the entire sequence, squatting back down, letting one end lower toward the platform, and steering the bar back to vertical before setting it flat. The lift is not over when you stand up. That is halftime. His numbers across the board make it clear he was not some specialist with big legs and nothing else. A 218-pound one-hand snatch, a 247-pound two-hand snatch, a 375-pound clean and jerk, all at around 205 pounds of body weight. The lifting historian David Willoughby, who was not an easy man to impress, and who spent his life measuring and cross-checking claims like these, put Steinborn in the conversation for the greatest all-around lifters he had ever documented. But the squat is what the title of this video is about, so let's actually test it. Is 553 pounds the strongest squat ever performed? Obviously not. Men have squatted more than double that. If you rank the lift purely by the number on the bar, Steinborn is not in the top 1,000, and the argument is over before it starts. That is the honest answer, and there is no point pretending otherwise. Except that comparing the numbers compares the wrong thing entirely. Steinborn's record was never really the squat, it was the loading. Because here's the part that has quietly held up for a century. Plenty of strong men have gone after the Steinborn lift over the decades, and the wall they hit is not their legs. It is the rockover. Getting the bar upright, controlling the tip, and receiving it in the hole is a skill problem and a courage problem before it is a strength problem. And according to the Stark Center's own accounting, most people who tried it found the whole thing genuinely intimidating once the bar crossed about 400 pounds. A handful reached roughly that mark. For decades, nobody got close to 500. Think about what that means. The exercise itself became easy the moment racks appeared, and the record still stood because the record was never about the exercise. A few era markers, because this is exactly where these stories usually get muddled. Steinborn's squat is generally said to have gone unbeaten until Doug Hepburn in the early 1950s, and that is a completely different world. Hepburn was lifting in a post-war landscape with standardized equipment, established federations, squat racks in every serious gym, and a training culture that took leg work for granted. He was a phenomenal strength athlete, but he was not solving the same problem Steinborn was solving, because by then the problem had been engineered out of existence. Same care applies to the squat boom itself. The explosion of heavy squatting in American training, the 20-rep breathing squat, the gospel of leg work as the foundation of everything. That is a 1930s story driven by Mark Berry at Strength Magazine and by Joseph Curtis Hayes, whose transformation on high-rep squats became the case study that converted a generation. Steinborn did not start that movement. He preceded it by roughly a decade, demonstrating in front of American audiences that the deep knee bend could be loaded far heavier than anyone here had assumed, at a time when the American strength press barely acknowledged it existed. Berry and Hayes built the church. Steinborn was the guy standing outside it in 1921 with a barbell, being ignored. And then, in 2018, something happened that put the whole thing in perspective for a modern audience. The Stark Center for Physical Culture and Sports at the University of Texas acquired Steinborn's original Globe barbell, the one he had kept and trained with for his entire life. To market, the strongman Martins Lysis attempted the Steinborn lift with roughly 500 pounds. He rocked it over, squatted it again, and then had to work the bar back down sideways to get out from under it. He is one of the strongest human beings alive, competing in an era with every advantage in equipment, nutrition, and coaching. He got close. That is the correct measure of what Steinborn did in a room in Philadelphia with a wooden floor and no safety anything. So the title holds, as long as you understand what it is claiming. Not the heaviest squatter, the strongest squatter in the sense that no man has ever been more completely responsible for every ounce of the weight on his back. Steinborn's life after the strength records is a different era and deserves to be labeled as such. He moved into professional wrestling and stayed in it for decades, becoming a genuinely respected worker and later a promoter. And he was the man who established professional wrestling in Orlando. He relocated there from Richmond, Virginia in 1952, retired from the ring the following year at around 60, and opened his own gym in Orlando in 1960, which he ran for 11 years. That gym had a wrestling ring in it, alongside the weights, which tells you exactly what kind of place it was, and exactly what kind of man ran it. He died in 1989, in his mid-90s, having kept his barbell with him the entire time. There is something almost absurd about the arc. A 15-year-old sailor becomes a prisoner of war by accident of geography, spends 5 years lifting concrete and human beings out of sheer boredom, gets told by Arthur Saxon to go to America, allegedly stows away to get there, walks into a Philadelphia gym as a total unknown, and within 2 years has set a record built around a movement so awkward and so frightening that a century of stronger men have mostly declined to attempt it. The equipment industry eventually solved his problem for everyone. Racks got cheap, and every lifter since has walked up to a loaded bar, stepped under it, and taken for granted the one thing Steinborn had to earn twice on every single set. Next time you unrack a squat, spare a thought for the man who had to invent a way to get the bar there in the first place. It is a strange kind of immortality, being remembered less for what you lifted than for how you got it onto your back.